Heated, there's an epidemic that's a bigger threat than the coronavirus and we're largely ignoring it. Dr. David L. Katz. Dr. David L. Katz, February 28, 8 minutes read. Photo, artist GND Photography, E+, Getty Images. You are, probably, worrying about coronavirus. For most of us, the anxious questions are, am I going to get the coronavirus? Is someone I love going to get it? If we do, is it going to kill us? For starters, let's be clear that no one ever gets a health guarantee. You might still have a heart attack even if you do everything advisable to avoid one. If you eat optimally, exercise, don't smoke, and so on, you make heart disease or cancer vastly less probable, but you don't get a guarantee. Human health simply does not come with those. And, of course, you can do everything right to be fit and healthy and keep your coronaries pristine, reliably avoid heart disease, and still get hit by a bus, or a falling tree, or lightning. Or get a brain tumor, for reasons we don't know. One thing you learn in medicine is that we control ship and sail, but never wind and wave. We don't control everything, ever. Bad things happen to good people doing everything right all the time. But they do happen much less often to those doing everything right than to everyone else, so what we do matters enormously. It shifts probability. So, the questions about coronavirus revert to questions about probability. And those we can answer, or at least establish the basis for answers. The ultimate questions, will I get this disease, and will it kill me if I do? Can be broken into component parts. What is my risk of exposure? Right now, unless you are in one of the rarefied populations around the world where the disease is concentrated, the answer is probably very, very, very low. There are, as I write this, February 28, just under 84,000 global cases out of a population of nearly 8 billion humans. That is one case per 100,000. For comparison, the lifetime risk of being struck by lightning in the United States is roughly 1 in 3,000. The coronavirus numbers could change, of course, and likely will, but for now total cases are of a 1 in many, many thousands magnitude, making exposure for any one of us highly improbable. Being exposed is necessary, but not sufficient, to get infected. If I am exposed, how probable is it I get the disease? This is the infection rate. If we use the most concentrated outbreak in Wuhan, China, as our model, with the assumption, obviously not entirely true, that everyone there was exposed, then the answer at the moment is just under 79,000 cases in a population of 11 million. That is an infection rate of roughly 7 per thousand, or 0.7%. If I get infected, how probable is it the disease will kill me? This is the fatality rate. Once again, the most dire numbers come from Wuhan, where there have been just under 2,800 deaths among the just under 79,000 infected. That ratio yields a fatality rate of less than 4 per 100, or just under 4%. I hasten to apologize for any semblance here that these numbers are adequate messengers. Every number in this mix is a real person just like you and me, with a family just like yours or mine. One of the great liabilities of public health is the capacity to lose the human reality of it in a sea of anonymizing statistics. As I use numbers to make my point, I point to the people behind the veil of those numbers, those families, and invite us both to direct the full measure of our condolence, our compassion, and the solidarity of our human kinship there. Among the messages of this, and any, pandemic is that however good we may be at accentuating our superficial differences, we are one, great, global human family, the same kind of animal, with just the same vulnerabilities. COVID-19 does not care at all who issued our passport. Okay, back to numbers. Here's an important reality check: we are much, much more likely to overlook the mildest cases of any disease than death from that disease. Death is hard to miss. What would it mean if this common scenario pertains to COVID-19? It means many more people than we know are getting the infection, but with mild symptoms passing for a cold, or maybe even no symptoms at all. The bad news here is that the infection rate might be much higher than we think. But does that increase your risk of getting the disease? Yes, and dying from it? No? I'll illustrate. Let's say you are a member of a hypothetical population of 2,000 people. We believe this population was exposed to coronavirus, that 200 people got infected, and that 8 died. The infection rate here is 202 thousandths, or 10%, much higher than the reality in Wuhan, and the fatality rate is 8/200ths, or 4%, about what has been seen to date in Wuhan. If you are a typical member of this population, your risk of both getting the infection and dying from it is 202 thousandths by 8/200ths, or 0.4%. We can see this directly from the total population numbers. 8 deaths out of 2,000 is, just as our calculations showed, 4 deaths per thousand, or 0.4%. And to flip this around, it means your chances of dodging the coronavirus bullet are 99.6%. Those are good odds. But what if we were wrong, not a little, but a lot, about the number of infections, because we had overlooked many that were too mild to attract anyone's attention? Well, then, maybe 4 times as many actually got infected, 800, rather than 200. This does mean you are much more likely to get the virus yourself, but does that make it more likely you will die from it? Not at all. The simple math shows why. We now have an infection rate of 802,000, or a very alarming 40%. But we now also have a fatality rate of only 8/800, or 1%. If we repeat the prior calculation for your personal risk of getting the virus and dying from it, we have 802,000 by 8/800, or the exact same 0.4% as before. This is true of coronavirus in the real world. If we are finding every case, then your risk of getting infected is, for now at least, very low, and your risk of dying if you do is also very low. If we are missing a lot of cases, your risk of infection may be much higher, but your risk of dying if infected is commensurately lower. It's a zero-sum game, and each sum, for now, means a very low probability indeed that you or someone you love will die from this disease. Before we wrap up, let's examine our propensity for risk distortion whenever confronting the new, the seemingly exotic, and the uncertain, and let's consider how epidemiologic familiarity clearly does breed contemptuous disregard. Worries over the exotic coronavirus are roiling the world now in every way imaginable. Those not anxious about life, limb, and loved ones are fretting over their stock portfolios. To date, there are a total of 60 cases in the United States, and 0 deaths. In contrast, humble influenza thus far this year has infected as many as 40 million of us, about 1 in 9, and caused as many as 40,000 deaths, a fatality rate of 1 per thousand. We breathlessly await the rushed development of a vaccine for COVID-19, even as we balk ever more routinely at a flu vaccine which is in fact very safe, effective at reducing infection and transmission, and directed at a disease so far many orders of magnitude more dire than the coronavirus. Nor is our penchant for risk distortion limited to infectious diseases. As I write this, I am mere days away from the release of my new book, co-authored with Mark Bittman, How to Eat. We wrote the book together not because we weren't already busy enough, but because infusing the conversation about diet and health in America with science filtered through a generally missing lens of sense is that important.